There's certain moments in time that tend to stick out in your memory more so than others. Certain things, certain instances where they will forever be ingrained in your brain. For a lot of people, that's, having a kid, a big move, buying a house. For me, it's two things, and it's kind of weird. Music. I always remember when I hear a song for the first time that I forever like. I know where I was, what I was doing, who I was with. And then the second thing is fights. Forever, as long as I can remember in my life, I've always clung to certain fights as just pivotal moments in my life. And I think back, to when I was in high school watching Roy Jones and Mike Tyson fight, back when I was a big boxing fan, to more recently UFC fights. Anderson Silva against Forrest Griffin, not because it was a good fight, but because there was such a gap in skill levels. It was weird. Chet Congo against Pat Barry, and if you watch that one, you know what I'm talking about. And then more recently, the knee that was heard around the world, Jorge Masvidal against Ben Askren. Before we get into the video, let me take the opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Brandon Osborne. I'm the Director of Training here at Momentum WOD. I'm a StrongFirst certified kettlebell instructor with about 10 years of clinical experience helping athletes recover from their musculoskeletal injuries in clinical practice. Today what we're going to be doing is looking at a strength training routine from none other than Jorge Gamebred Masvidal. And we're going to be breaking down the details of his workout, letting you know what we like, what we don't like, and what we would change so you can take that information and implement it in your own strength training programming. What I am talking about is off the cuff, it's on the fly, and it is an honest appraisal of what I am looking at. The intent of what I am saying is not to belittle or put anybody down, but to provide constructive feedback on what I see so you can take that information and better what you're doing. So, with that being said, without further ado, let's get into Jorge Gamebred Masvidal. So over the course of this workout, Jorge's strength coach puts him through a series of movements that are very specific to MMA. There's going to be a lot of exercises that are specific for striking. So if you train jiu-jitsu, it's probably not as pertinent to you. But if you're a mixed martial artist, some of these movements would be things that might be valuable for you to incorporate in your programming if you're trying to improve striking power and strength. So there's a lot of band work to start with. Jorge's strength coach has him on a prone table with his hips propped up. He's got a band around his neck, 2 bands from his arms, and he's doing a hyperextension movement while pressing with the bands. And this is an interesting exercise. This would be a hard one to reproduce if you didn't have somebody else there to help you and you didn't have the equipment that he's using. What this is going to work is posterior chain power, glutes, lower back, more so lower back than glutes, I would say, because his hips aren't really extending. It's more so his back that's extending. And then obviously pressing power. The use of bands is interesting because you're going to get a progressive resistance. The resistance is going to increase the farther away you get from your body. So, I like the use of bands in this instance. I like the exercise as something that's specific for mixed martial arts. And I also like the fact that they're working the extensor muscles of the lower back. Generally, people will work those muscles when they're performing something like a deadlift, but it's not as much something that is focused on as it pertains to sport-specific movements, as it pertains to core stability, as it pertains to injury prevention. So I like the use of this exercise, and he's not putting his back into a position where it's so hyperextended under load that I would be concerned about him injuring. If he were to do something like this with a deadlift where he's pulling his back into that hyperextended position, you're going to start to shear the joints of the spine, and that can lead to injury. So we wouldn't want to do that. There's an injury called spondylolisthesis, which may or may not be symptomatic. Athletes essentially create a fracture of a part of their spine as a result of this. I wouldn't be concerned about that with him. So I like this exercise. I like what he's doing. I like how he's doing it. I think it's creative and it's functional for what he's trying to do. And he's got his hair going as he's going through the movement, which adds extra bonus points for, you know, flair and whatnot. Jorge's talking to us on a balcony here in Miami. Now we got some band work. He's working on some striking, changing angles. We're going back into a front rack squat, which we saw TJ Dillashaw doing in our video last week. There's a lot of rotational movement in his workout routine for good reason. You know, it's going to work core stability. We're going into some hex bar deadlifts. We're going into a kettlebell snatch, which we're going to revisit momentarily, and some more striking with some bands. So the movement Jorge was just performing, I want to rewind. He's doing a kneeling thruster with a landmine. This is an exercise where I think there's a lot of value to doing something like this if you're training as an athlete. If you're not training as an athlete, it might not be something that's going to necessarily fit the bill in terms of what you're looking to do. But as an athlete, this is a good exercise to incorporate into your routine. If you don't have this equipment on hand, how would you go about performing something like this? And that's a question that I hope to answer here and now. You know, because I am a kettlebell coach, I like to provide you with simple solutions to these strength training queries using that one piece of equipment from home. So start in a kneeling position. You can have the kettlebell in one of two positions. A front rack position here, wrist strong, forearm vertical, or you could have the kettlebell in almost a goblet position. I would invert it so you'd be able to press the weight more easily. From there, you're sitting back, butt on heels. You're going to explode out of that position, creating power with your posterior chain. And from there, you're going to press the weight overhead, what we would call a kneeling thruster. It's a simple movement, but it's a valuable movement to coordinate biomechanics, coordinate the generation of power from a kneeling position, which is something that you have to do whether you're training jiu-jitsu or training mixed martial arts. And maybe not so much a kneeling position, but the ability to generate power from positions where you are at a deficit. So it's functional, it's sport specific, and it's going to improve your performance in a number of different ways. We're back to the banded hyperextensions. Got some more striking going on here. And I love watching him striking. I think that's a part of his game that has evolved so much over the years. You know, there's nothing like seeing a good striker hit the angles, move, head movement, footwork, all that stuff together. It gets me excited when I'm watching fights. So more rotational ball throws here, more striking, more hex bar deadlifts, which if you're tall is definitely a better way to do a deadlift than a straight bar barbell deadlift. It's going to spare your back a little bit more. So we're on the pull-up bar. We're doing medicine ball crunches, I guess you would call them. He's hanging, he's got straps, he's hanging from them, and he's bringing the medicine ball up with his legs, working his abs. People talk about this as like a lower abdominal movement. It's your abs. It's essentially one muscle, your rectus abdominis, that this is working. I've talked about it previously, and I will talk about it again. This does not do much for your performance. Maybe it's testing your grit and your willpower, but it's not doing much from a functional perspective for you becoming a better athlete. So if this is something that you're incorporating in your strength training routine, whether it's this or sit-ups or crunches, I would do away with them because they are not going to actually make you a better combatant. So Jorge, I hope he does away with this. So I'm going to pause the video here, and the reason being is because I want to look into this exercise in particular in detail, the way that Jorge is performing it. It's a very quick clip, but there's a lot to be gained from the few seconds that he's performing this exercise. The exercise we're about to watch is what's called a kettlebell snatch, which is one of the best exercises that you can be performing if you are a combat sports athlete, whether that's mixed martial arts or jiu-jitsu. The value inherent within this exercise is enormous. What this exercise is going to do is a couple of different things. It's going to build your conditioning, it's going to build your core, posterior chain power, full body power, and shoulder stability, all of those things, and shoulder mobility a little bit as well, well, scapular mobility. All those things together in one exercise, it's hard to find something that's going to be more efficient at developing your skills as an athlete. So that's the reason why this exercise is so important and so valuable for him to be performing and for you to be performing if you can do it well, which he is doing. So as we first get into it, I want to throw something out there. When it comes to kettlebell training, there's two different styles of training. There's what's called sport style and hard style. I am trained as a hard style coach. That is the type of training that I am a proponent for, and the type of training that I am proficient with. Jorge, the style that he is utilizing when he is performing this exercise is a sport style snatch. And we'll see as he's working through this movement some subtle differences that make it more of that style of movement. What you'll notice as well is the bell that Jorge is using is a sport style bell, and the reason I point that out is because the difference in style of bell will affect how the bell feels in terms of the weight distribution, the handle, the grip. All of those things will kind of play a part when you're performing the exercises. So what you'll notice as Jorge is performing this movement, as he's going through this exercise, is at the bottom and top of the movement, he's adding some rotation to it, which is that sport style component that I just brought up. So as he's going through the backswing, you'll see that he rotates his shoulders. And then at the top of the motion, when he's beginning the downswing phase, he's also adding some rotation to the movement. The reason why I wouldn't do this if you're not proficient with this exercise is because of what is called movement coupling. What you're doing is you're combining two different motions at once, which increases your risk of injury if your technique is not spot on. You're adding rotation to flexion, which will create a greater chance of injuring your low back as you're going through this exercise. So if you can help it, that would be the only thing I would change for you if you're doing this exercise at home. Do away with the rotation, keep your shoulders square to whatever is in front of you as that bell comes down in front of you and as your hips hinge backwards. So as he's doing this exercise, you'll notice he goes really deep into his hinge, which is one of the most important components of performing a snatch well. And the reason being is because the hinge is going to be the part of the exercise that allows you to generate the most power. The farther back into the hinge you go, the more leg drive you can generate for the upswing, and the more successful each repetition is going to be. Further, you'll notice as he's going through the movement, he's keeping the bell very close to his body. From a technique perspective, we call this taming the arc. And it's important to do that to prevent the bell from slamming on your forearms and to prevent the bell from getting too far away from your body, which once again is going to put your back at risk and it's going to put your shoulders at risk. And it's going to make your repetitions less smooth. It's going to affect the quality of each repetition and the linear nature of the force you're generating. So Jorge does all of these things really, really well. He's keeping the bell close to his body. He's taming the arc. He's locking out overhead. He's hinging his hips really deep into the motion, so he's generating a lot of power, and he is getting the most out of this exercise. So I have nothing but good things to say about what he's doing here with the kettlebell snatch. That does it for Jorge's strength training routine for the day. I think his coaches are doing an excellent job. There are just a few exercises that I would remove from the routine that are kind of old staples in strength training that, as more research has come out, we know that they don't provide as much value as we had initially thought, particularly crunching type movements. Everything else looked really good. I like the hyperextension banded exercise with progressive resistance that he was performing at the beginning of the workout. I like the landmine thrusters that he was doing in the middle of the workout. And I love the snatches that he was performing at the end of the workout. Altogether, I think he's doing the right things, and I think the routine that his trainers have built for him is very specific to the skills that he is trying to build. If you are trying to build skills that are relevant to your performance for your combat sport, head over to MomentumWOD.com, where we have a free 7-day trial of kettlebell performance training for combat sports athletes like yourself. All of this is completely free. There is no credit card required. You head over there, put your email address in, and you are good to go. You have full access to everything the site has to offer. If you have enjoyed this video, if you have found value in the things that I've had to say, you owe it to yourself. Hit the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment below. Let me know what you want to hear me talk about next. If there is something you're struggling with in your strength training, let me know about it, and I will address it in a future video. So on that note, I will be signing off. Until next time, this is Dr. Brandon Osborne of Momentum WOD. It has been my pleasure. I'll see you then.